There's a 60-mile stretch of jungle between Colombia and Panama where the road just stops. Not because no one tried to build one, because every attempt failed. Swamps too deep, terrain too steep, disease too relentless. So engineers gave up. Nature won. And that failure might be quietly holding together one of the most important systems in the Western Hemisphere. Because without it, America's entire border strategy starts to break down. This is the Darien Gap. It's smaller than some American counties. It doesn't have a government, a mayor, or a zip code. And right now, it's doing one of the most important jobs in the entire region. A job it was never supposed to do. In effect, this stretch of jungle is doing something no government fully can, controlling who moves north and how fast. Most people who've heard of the Darien Gap think of it as a strange geographic footnote, because on paper, this shouldn't exist. There's a road called the Pan-American Highway that connects Alaska all the way to the southern tip of Argentina, nearly 19,000 miles of continuous pavement. Mountains, deserts, rainforests, some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. And yet, across all of that distance, there's only one place where the road disappears. 60 miles. Right here, between Colombia and Panama, the highway just ends. And that gap isn't just a missing road. It changes how an entire continent connects, and who can move across it. For most of the 20th century, this was treated as a problem to be solved. Plans were drawn up, construction crews were sent in, governments tried, repeatedly, to push a road through. Every attempt failed. And the reason why tells you everything about what this place actually is. Because the Darien Gap isn't just empty space. It's one of the few places left where geography still sets the rules. To understand why the road stops here, you have to understand what this place actually is. On a map, the Darien looks simple. It's the narrowest point between North and South America. A thin strip of land where the continents pinch together before widening again. It looks like a bottleneck. In reality, it's more like a trap. Because the problem isn't just distance, it's what that distance is made of. The ground isn't stable. It's a shifting maze of swamps, rivers, and flooded lowlands that change with the seasons. What looks like solid ground one month can disappear the next. There's no reliable path, only routes that constantly move. And even when you find one, the terrain doesn't cooperate. The land rises and falls sharply, sometimes climbing or dropping hundreds of feet within a single mile. There's no gradual slope, no predictable route, just constant, exhausting elevation changes. Then there's the jungle itself. The canopy is so dense it blocks GPS signals, which means even modern navigation can fail. You're not just walking through it, you're navigating blind. And everything around you is working against you. Venomous snakes, jaguars, insects that carry disease, an environment that doesn't just resist human movement, it actively punishes it. And on top of all that, there's the human layer. On the Colombian side, armed groups have controlled this region for decades. First, guerrilla forces, now criminal organizations. On the Panamanian side, the government covers an area so large and so difficult that meaningful control has always been limited. So even if you could build a road through the terrain, you'd still have to control it. And that's something that no one has ever fully managed. This is why the road was never built. Not because of a lack of money, not because of a lack of effort, but because the Darien is one of the few places left where geography still wins. And for most of history, that didn't matter, because almost no one was trying to cross it. That was about to change. For most of its history, almost no one crossed the Darien Gap. The numbers were small, hundreds of people a year, maybe a few thousand in worse years. It was too dangerous, too remote, and for anyone trying to migrate north, it didn't make much sense. There were easier routes. Then something changed. Around 2021, the numbers started rising, then rising faster. Then, in 2023, more than 500,000 people crossed the Darien Gap in a single year. 500,000. That's not a trickle or a slowly building crisis. That's a system suddenly operating at full scale. And these weren't isolated groups. They were coming from everywhere. Venezuelans fleeing economic collapse, Haitians displaced by years of instability, Ecuadorians, Cubans, people from West Africa, people from as far away as Bangladesh and China, all moving through the same 60-mile stretch of jungle. Because at that point, there was nowhere else to go. The crossing takes between 4 and 10 days. There are no roads, no infrastructure, no reliable supply lines. People carry what they can, food, water, whatever money they have. And along the route, the evidence builds up. Backpacks left behind, shoes worn through, entire camps abandoned. Signs of people who ran out of strength, or time, or both. Aid groups on the Panamanian side have documented deaths from drowning, dehydration, violence, and exposure. The real number is almost certainly higher, because this is a place where things disappear. So why were hundreds of thousands of people willing to attempt this? Because every other option had been closed. Visa rules tightened across Central America. Border enforcement increased, often with funding and coordination from the United States. Sea routes became more heavily patrolled. One by one, the paths that migrants had used for years became harder, riskier, or simply unavailable. But the Darien Gap couldn't be closed the same way. You can't build a fence through it. You can't monitor it consistently. You can't shut it down with a policy decision. So while every other route narrowed, this one remained, because it was the only one left open. And once that happened, the Darien stopped being a barrier. It became a funnel. When 500,000 people a year need to cross a jungle, someone is going to figure out how to charge them for it. The Clan del Golfo, a powerful Colombian criminal organization, effectively took control of the Darien crossing routes and turned them into a business, and not a small one. Here's how it works. Migrants arriving on the Colombian side are met by cartel-affiliated guides and brokers. The price for passage varies, roughly $150 to $400 per person, depending on the service level. Pay more and you get a guide who actually knows the terrain. Pay less and you get pointed in a direction and told good luck. Some packages include river transport for part of the route. Others include basic food. The operation is tiered, structured, and, from a pure business perspective, remarkably organized. At this point, it's not just smuggling, it's logistics, a system that moves people through terrain that governments couldn't control, at scale. At 500,000 crossings a year, even at the low end of pricing, that's somewhere in the range of $75 million to $200 million annually flowing into cartel coffers from the Darien alone. Some estimates run even higher. Think about what that means. A criminal organization has effectively built a toll road through the jungle. Not with pavement, but with presence, violence, and just enough reliability to keep the product moving. The Darien didn't stop the flow, it privatized it. And this is the moment where the United States enters the story in a way that most people have never heard explained. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. The United States runs what's sometimes called a layered enforcement strategy on its southern border. The basic idea is, don't just try to stop people when they reach the US-Mexico border. Push the deterrence further south. Fund Mexico's border controls. Fund Guatemala's. Fund Panama's capacity to manage what comes through that jungle. Every year, the US sends millions of dollars to Panama, specifically to help manage migration. Processing centers, border agents, monitoring infrastructure. The official framing is humanitarian. The actual function is strategic. If people can be slowed down or filtered thousands of miles before they ever reach US territory, the numbers at the border look smaller, and the political pressure in Washington stays manageable. But here's the part that makes this genuinely uncomfortable when you say it plainly. The US isn't just funding Panama to process the flow. It is, in a very real sense, depending upon the Darien itself, on its hostility, its danger, its ability to slow things down as a natural enforcement mechanism. A wall the US didn't have to build. A barrier it doesn't have to defend. A deterrent it never has to explain to voters. The system works, not because it's controlled, but because it's dangerous enough to slow people down on its own. The Darien Gap has become an outsourced border, and the more you understand that, the more alarming the next part becomes. Because this system only works if the Darien stays exactly as it is, and there are at least 3 ways it doesn't. Scenario 1, Panama tries to shut it down. Panama has threatened serious crackdowns before. Military deployments, forced removals, real enforcement operations in the jungle. If that happens, the flow doesn't stop, it moves, most likely onto ocean routes. Small boats, open water, far more dangerous crossings with far higher death tolls. The kind of images that create international crises overnight. Or as the cartels adapt, find new overland corridors through Central America, and the US finds its layered strategy has a new and less predictable leak. Scenario 2. The road gets built. Every few years, someone seriously proposes completing the Pan-American Highway. Connect the gap, unlock trade, integrate the economies of North and South America. The proposals always collapse. Environmental concerns, cost, political complexity between Colombia and Panama. But if that road were ever built, even a basic paved highway, the entire calculus of the Darien changes in an instant. What currently takes 10 days of survival becomes a bus ride. The cartel model evaporates, and the natural deterrent that US policy has been quietly relying on disappears overnight. Scenario 3. The flow doesn't slow down. In 2021, around 130,000 people crossed. In 2022, around 250,000. In 2023, over 500,000. If that trajectory continues, the Darien stops being a bottleneck and becomes a corridor. Too high volume for the current system to manage, too visible to ignore, and too politically charged for any administration to handle quietly. Any one of these scenarios breaks the system. The uncomfortable truth is that all 3 are real possibilities at the same time. So here's where we land. The United States is depending on a jungle it didn't create, can't control, and almost never mentions publicly. Panama is managing a crisis that originates thousands of miles away, knowing that a unilateral crackdown might just relocate the problem rather than resolve it. A criminal organization has turned the most dangerous overland route in the Western Hemisphere into a structured, profitable business. And the people actually making the crossing, scared, paying, surviving, sometimes not surviving, are the part of this system that no government has a serious plan for. 60 miles, no road, over 500,000 people a year. There's a sign on the Colombian side of the Darien where the Pan-American Highway ends. There's another side on the Panamanian side where it begins again. In between, for now, the jungle holds. But here's the question nobody in any capital city wants to answer out loud. How long can 60 miles of jungle keep carrying this much weight? Because the moment the Darien stops being an obstacle and starts being a corridor, this entire system stops working. And nothing has been built to replace it.